So, hello everyone, and welcome to Animal Legal Defense Fund's Animal Law Academy. My name is Anne Marie Bastano, and I'll be the host today. We'll be discussing our Legislative Affairs Program mid-year review. Just to let you know briefly before I turn things over to Alicia, we will have a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation. You'll notice the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so go ahead and drop your questions in there, and we'll get to as many as possible. You will see that this webinar has closed captions as an option. So you'll see that little box at the bottom of your screen as well. You can click there to show captions if that interests you. Okay, so let me introduce Alicia. Joining us today is our Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager, Alicia Prygoski. Alicia works to develop and advance the Animal Legal Defense Fund's legislative campaigns at the local, state, and federal levels. Alicia, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. I'm going to pass things over to you, and I'll be back later to help out with Q&A. Thanks so much, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. I appreciate the introduction, and I am so thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much to everyone who is attending to learn a little bit more about the Legislative Affairs Program and our mid-year review. Like Anne Marie said, my name is Alicia Prygoski, and I'm a Strategic Legislative Affairs Manager for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. So for those who might be new to Animal Legal Defense Fund, our mission is to protect the lives and advance the interests of animals through the legal system. And of course, I work as part of the Legislative Affairs team. And as part of the Legislative Affairs team, our work is to pass laws to protect animals. We're going to dive more into that today. So how does the Legislative Affairs Program work to protect animals? We do this several ways. So the first is by passing laws that protect animals and advance their interests in the legal system. So we try to get good laws introduced and passed to protect animals. And then also we work to stop laws that harm animals. There are bills that come through the legislative system that are not good for animals and that we have to fight to ensure that those laws are not being passed and that they're going to cause more animal suffering. And then also we do this by ensuring that animals are part of the conversation. So legislators have so many different issue areas that they are working on every single day. They have so many things on their minds. They have so many different stakeholders talking to them. And so it's really important that we make sure animals are part of that conversation and that our legislators and our elected officials understand that animals are important and that we should consider their interests when we are talking about legislation. And before we dive into that legislation, I wanted to introduce the team. We are a small team. We are an 8-person team working throughout the country. And I'm sure that some of you here with us today have interacted with some of the folks that you see here or have emailed with us or are connected with us in some way. So together we work on hundreds of bills throughout the country in different states, really at every level of government. And so I just quickly wanted to go through. Kim Kelly is the director of our team. She steers the ship, so to speak, and helps with determining what our legislative strategy is going to be and our priority bills. And then Kathleen Schatzman and I help with strategy development, as well as working on bills in a number of different states and at the federal level as well. Then we have our fantastic Legislative Affairs Fellow, Lindsay Verlig, and then our Legislative Affairs Managers, Jennifer, Stephanie, and Brian, covering so much legislation in so many different states. And finally, the newest member of our team, Allison, who is working on federal legislation on the Hill. So that is our team. We're a small but very impactful team, and I hope that many of you get the chance to meet some of the team members. So now let's talk about why we're doing a mid-year update. This is actually a really great time to do an update because so many states have just concluded their legislative session for the year. So Congress has a year-round session. They are meeting all the time to discuss bills, to pass bills, to hold committee hearings, and work on legislation. That's not the case in every state. As you can see with this map here, some states meet at different times of the year than others. So right now, for instance, a lot of states are out of session, and that's normal. It's pretty typical for many states to start meeting in January and then conclude sometime, April to June. And so this really makes sense for a mid-year update because we know what the outcome has been for so many pieces of legislation this year, because a lot of these states have just wrapped up. And I wanted to take a second to click on, well, actually, I will just exit out of my slide here. We have a really great tool on our website. It's aldf.org/legislative schedule. And this actually shows you when each state is in session. So I'm going to scroll down here. I highly recommend that you check this out. And you can see every single state. So Alabama this year met from March to June, Alaska from January to May, and so on. And this is a really great visual because it really illustrates exactly just how variable it is in every single state. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into how we can effectively advocate for animals, but it is important to have an idea of when legislators are at the Capitol meeting on legislation and when they're back home in district. You can certainly reach out to them anytime and meet with them anytime, but it's just kind of helpful to keep an eye on the sessions and when they're actually meeting to pass bills, when they might be a little busier, when they might have a little more time on their hands for meetings. So I encourage you to check this page out, state legislative schedules, on the Animal Legal Defense Fund website. And I am going to toggle back to my slides here. Okay, so I also just wanted to talk about levels of government. We really need stronger laws for animals at all levels of government. So that's going to be the local, and this is the town or city councils or commissions, the counties. This is the state legislatures, of course, and then the federal legislative body, which is Congress. We work at all of these levels of government here on our legislative affairs team, and it's really important that we have advocates working at all of these levels of government as well to try and protect animals. It really, there are animal issues that pop up at all of these levels. There are opportunities to protect animals at all of these levels as well. And I just wanted to mention another tool really quick. I'm not gonna exit out to this one, but I do encourage you to go and take a look. It's aldf.org/findmyrep. And this is a good tool in case you don't know who your elected officials are. You can enter your address. It's really easy. You do have to enter your exact address because in some legislative districts kind of cut right through the middle of a city or a town. And so we want to make sure that you're getting the accurate results and ensuring that you actually are getting your own elected officials. But anyway, if you do that, you're going to get a page that pops up with your state and federal elected officials. And it's great because it also links to their contact information. So you get their contact information, you get their social media, makes it really easy to reach out. So I just wanted to mention that tool as well. We do have that available and it is pretty useful. So now let's dive into the legislation that we've been working on. So we're going to start with federal and then work our way down to state and local. We are currently in the 118th Congress, and Congress has 2-year sessions. So that goes from 2023 to 2024. There are some differences between the levels of government. So federal, for instance, takes a little bit longer to pass things because it covers the entire nation. And there are different considerations that you have to have when you're trying to pass bills in Congress versus state legislatures. So we measure our victories a little bit differently at the federal level. You know, for instance, measuring a victory at the state level is often when a bill gets passed into law. But at the federal level, we have to work more incrementally. So a victory really could be getting a bill introduced, you know, just getting it past that first step in the process, sort of showing Congress and showing the general public that this is an issue worth discussing and an issue worth talking about. You know, that can be considered a victory in Congress sometimes. So we work on so many bills at the federal level. There are so many animal issues that we're engaging on, so many pieces of legislation. So unfortunately, it's not possible to talk about all of them today, but I did just want to highlight a few. So to start out, here are a few bills that we are working on pretty extensively that we are strongly in support of and that we're really excited about. So the first one of those is the Mink Virus Act. This has been introduced in the House of Representatives, and we're working on getting more support on the Senate side. And it phases out mink farming in the United States. This is really important because mink farming is inherently cruel. Mink are confined to tiny barren cages where they're overcrowded, they're not receiving veterinary care. They are packed in by the hundreds or thousands. And so it's inherently cruel for the animals themselves, but it's also a very real risk for zoonotic disease transmission. Because the animals are confined so tightly, zoonotic disease can spread rapidly through a mink farm. And so we've seen this happen with two examples of this are COVID-19 and avian flu, actually. So COVID-19 has run pretty rampant through mink farms across the world, here in the United States as well. There have been 18 mink farms in the United States and more than 20,000 mink who have died due to COVID-19 outbreaks on mink farms. And it's concerning because with mink specifically, what we've seen with COVID-19 is there has been at least one instance where mink have transmitted COVID-19 back to humans. This happened in Michigan with 4 people. There was testing done, and it was confirmed that those folks did have the same strain of COVID-19 that is present in mink. So that's how we know the transmission occurred that way. And so it's not just that mink are capable of transmitting from mink to mink, but also back to humans. And that is how zoonotic disease outbreaks start. That is how pandemics start. And so there's a really serious risk here. I also just wanted to mention avian flu. We're currently in the largest outbreak of avian flu that we have had in this country. And again, this is usually a disease that we see in bird species, but we have seen an outbreak of avian flu at a mink farm in Spain. So it just goes to show that the way that mink's immune system they can contract these diseases, and there is the potential for these viruses to then mutate and get transmitted back to humans. So phasing out mink farming in the United States really just makes sense. This bill would also set up a grant program for farmers to transition out of the industry, making it easier, and it would offer a 1-year phase out. So it's a very common sense bill that would help animals, of course, but really work to decrease the risk of zoonotic disease transmission. We are also working on the Transparency in Depopulation Act that's yet to be reintroduced this Congress. It was introduced last Congress, and it would prohibit federal funding from ventilation shutdown on factory farms. So depopulation is an industry term for the mass killing of farmed animals due to something like an outbreak of disease among the animals, or during COVID-19 years, supply chain disruption. We saw that early on in the pandemic. And so there are several methods of depopulation. All of them are inherently problematic and do cause some level of suffering, but ventilation shutdown has been shown to be really the absolute worst. This is when all of the openings to one of these warehouses are closed off. So the animals essentially they suffocate to death and they die of heat stroke. The temperature rises, and it's really problematic because they're conscious the whole time. So the temperature is rising. They're not able to get proper oxygen, and so that they're suffering, and they are experiencing this fully conscious, oftentimes for up to an hour. It is not quick. It's very slow. Some studies have showed that it doesn't actually work. It's not 100% effective. So these animals have to suffer through this and then get killed in a different way. It's very, very, very problematic and causes vast amounts of suffering. So we don't believe that this is something that the federal government should be funding. So we're strongly in support of this bill. We're working to get this reintroduced in Congress. Next is the Farm System Reform Act. We are supporting this bill as part of a coalition. It's a really important bill. It would place a moratorium on the largest confined animal feeding operations by 2040. And these are the industrial animal agriculture facilities that create so many problems, not just for the animals who are confined so tightly in cages and crates on these factory farms, but also for the environment, for surrounding communities, for farm workers, for public health. These are inherently unsustainable systems, and create a lot of issues for so many different stakeholders and so many different groups, animals, environment, public health. And so the Farm System Reform Act really would be an effective piece of legislation and something that we support. Next is Goldie's Act. This has been introduced, and this deals with enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act. So it would require the USDA to confiscate suffering animals and work to strengthen the Animal Welfare Act with regard to inspection and licensing. The Animal Welfare Act enforcement has been so lax, especially in recent years. There are so many gaps and loopholes in enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act, and Goldie's Act would work to close some of those. So this was named after a dog, Goldie, who unfortunately was suffering on a factory farm, or I'm sorry, not on a factory farm, suffering at a puppy mill in Iowa. And USDA went in, noted that she was in poor condition, but did not confiscate her. And so the next time they showed up, her condition had worsened, and unfortunately, she had to be euthanized. And so this bill was named in honor of her, with the hope that USDA will begin to confiscate more animals and get them to safety before it is too late. And then another bill that deals with Animal Welfare Act enforcement is the Animal Welfare Enforcement Improvement Act. This would do several things to strengthen enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act. It would require dealers and exhibitors to go through unannounced pre-license inspection. It would also prohibit someone from obtaining a license if they violated any animal protection laws. So again, it's another bill that works to further close some of those loopholes in the Animal Welfare Act right now that are resulting in poor enforcement, and then of course, animal suffering. And then just a few more bills that we support. Again, we can't possibly talk about every single bill that we're supportive of. So if there are any issue areas that you're curious about or that you don't see here, please get in touch with me, because I'd be happy to discuss some of the other bills on our list that we've endorsed or that we've supported that you might not see here. So the first one on this list is the Providing for Unhoused People with Pets Act. This provides funding to shelters for unhoused people so that those shelters can retrofit to accommodate animals. So it works to ensure that unhoused people never have to make that really impossible choice to find shelter and to find housing or give up their beloved family member. They are hopefully under the PUP Act, it would open doors so that housing would be more widely available and people could bring their pets with them. And then along the same lines of really trying to ensure that people and families are able to keep their pets with them, is the Pets Belong with Families Act. This is another really good bill. It would prohibit breed-based restriction on pets in public housing. So working to keep families together there. And then we have the Horse Transportation Safety Act. This would prohibit the transportation of horses in double-deck trailers. Double-deck trailers are not meant for horses. Horses are too tall to fully stand up, and so this causes a lot of issues. They can't stand up properly, so they're going to lose their balance when these trucks are going down the highway. They're going to get injuries. In some cases, that is going to result in extreme injury or death. And so by prohibiting that, the Horse Transportation Safety Act would do a lot to protect horses. There's the Industrial Agriculture Accountability Act, and this is really a wide reform on the industrial animal agriculture industry. It addresses so many different aspects of this to improve the lives of farmed animals, including a prohibition on faster line speeds at slaughter, and then protection for downed pigs. And then lastly, there is the Emergency and Disaster Preparedness for Farm Animals Act. And this addresses things such as natural disasters. I think we've all seen it in the news when a blizzard comes through, and unfortunately, hundreds or thousands of cows are out in pasture and they freeze, or there are floods, and that can kill whole herds or flocks of animals there. And so this bill would require ag producers to develop emergency and disaster preparedness plans in order to receive indemnity payments from the federal government. That is not the case right now. They can get those indemnity payments without ensuring that they have done something to try and to prevent this situation from occurring. So we are also strongly in support of this bill. So now on to some bills that we oppose at the federal level. Kind of like I was talking about before, we see bills that come through that we support. We see bills that come through that we oppose. We have to do whatever it takes to make sure that we are trying to protect animals and advocate for their best interests. So one that I wanted to mention that is really a threat to farmed animals is the Ending Agricultural Trade Suppression Act. It's a very dangerous bill. It would harm farmed animals, and it would also jeopardize states' ability to legislate for agricultural products within their own borders. It could potentially preempt thousands of state and local laws that have to do with agriculture, notably those that look like Proposition 12 out of California, that have been passed in several states to prohibit the sale of pig products, of pork, from pigs raised in extreme confinement. This is a broad federal overreach that would set a really concerning precedent when it comes to states' rights, but also food safety, protecting rural communities, protecting the environment, and of course, animals. So we are doing a lot to fight back against this, and we definitely need your help. If you are interested in getting involved with this bill, please reach out to me. I'm going to include my email at the end of the presentation, so I would love to talk to you more about how we fight this and how we stop it from moving. Then we have the American Sovereignty and Species Protection Act. This has a really misleading name. This does not protect species. It actually does quite the opposite. It could harm endangered species living in captivities, like those who we see at roadside zoos. It would do this by prohibiting non-native species from being listed as endangered. And that is so many of the species that we have worked to protect, notably through our lawsuits with regard to roadside zoos. And so this would really do a lot of damage to our ability to ensure protection for those species. And then I also did just want to mention, there have been so many attacks on the Endangered Species Act at the federal level. I think that there are upwards of a dozen bills right now intended to really just chip away at the Endangered Species Act until it is essentially meaningless. So we're doing what we can to stop those bills from passing as well. And then finally, some additional federal efforts. We're always looking for ways to protect animals at the federal level. Sometimes you have to get creative. You have to work through sort of these bigger must-pass bill packages like the Farm Bill. That has to be passed every 5 years. So we know that if we can get something good for animals in the Farm Bill, that's going to be passed no matter what. So we really try to work through that. We try to work through the federal budgeting appropriations process. And then also we try to see what we can do in terms of regulatory opportunities. There are opportunities to work through agency action as well to protect animals. So I also just wanted to quickly mention congress.gov. If you are interested in learning more about any of the bills that I have mentioned today, or any other federal bills for that matter, I would recommend going to congress.gov. It has all of the information. It has bill numbers, names, sponsors, co-sponsors, history, status, everything like that. It's a really great website to keep track of federal legislation. So now on to state legislation. Our team has done so much work at the state level this year, working on dozens of bills since our last legislative update. And again, it really wouldn't be possible to discuss all of the bills we've worked on. So I'm just going to focus on the victories over the last 6 months. At the state level, we do see bills passing into law much more frequently than the federal level. And so we've had some really incredible wins over the last 6 months that I'm excited to talk about today. Before we go into victories, though, I just wanted to mention I am going to talk about our ongoing efforts. I thought the best way to do this would just be to kind of list the issue areas with some of these ongoing efforts. So these issue areas, we are likely working on bills in several states pertaining to these issue areas, like our courtroom animal advocate programs, retail pet store sales bans, cat declaw bans. There are so many issue areas that we're working on in a variety of states, and you do tend to see the same issue areas pop up in different states. So again, if I'm not addressing any of these when I talk about our victories, it doesn't mean that we're not working on the issues. It's just that we're likely still working on the legislation, and it's something that we might be looking to get introduced next session. All right, so now on to our victories. We've had victories, like I said, in several states. So I'm going to kind of just go state by state here and talk about what we've seen, what we've worked on, and ways that these bills and now these laws in some cases are going to protect animals. So the first one is Colorado. In Colorado, an omnibus pets in housing bill passed. This was really exciting. It does several things, including capping pet rent and pet deposits, and generally just making housing more accessible for renters with animals. So really good bill there. Then we have Connecticut. So an omnibus animal cruelty bill passed in Connecticut. This closes a loophole that was essentially preventing prosecution for the sexual abuse of animals. And then it also created a mandatory possession ban following animal cruelty convictions, and then requiring veterinarians to report suspected animal cruelty. So all of those things combined are really going to do a lot in Connecticut to help prevent animal cruelty and animal abuse and protect animals. Next on my list is Delaware. We had several really exciting bills pass into law in Delaware this year. So the first was a cross-reporting bill for child abuse and animal abuse. So it requires those agencies to essentially talk to each other, to report to each other. Because there is so much evidence pointing to the fact that when one type of abuse, such as child abuse or domestic violence or elder abuse, is happening, animal abuse is likely happening as well, and vice versa. So this bill will really help to protect both children and animals, which is absolutely fantastic. Delaware also passed a bill that requires consideration for the best interest of animals when deciding custody in divorce cases. So really acknowledging that animals are more than just mere property. Animals are sentient beings, and their interests should be considered when deciding who they are going to live with and who is eventually going to take care of them. And then also Delaware passed a bill concerning protection orders with animals, including animals in protective orders. So again, really exciting things happening in Delaware, so much progress. And then there was Florida. So Florida had several animal bills introduced, and these are the ones that did pass. Really exciting updates out of Florida. The first is a bill that prohibits breed restriction in public housing authorities in Florida, and it also ends the grandfathering of certain municipalities that were still restricting dogs based on breeds. So Florida had an overarching prohibition on this, but it grandfathered in a few select communities. So that grandfathering is wiped out, and communities in Florida are no longer allowed to restrict dogs based on their breed. Then there was a law enforcement bill passed in Florida that increases penalties for cruelty to law enforcement animals. And this is really exciting to see. Law enforcement animals are doing their jobs and putting their lives on the line to protect others. And so in return, it is really exciting to see more protection for them as well. And then finally, a wildlife related bill. We supported this last one. It increases penalties for the escape or release of venomous reptiles. And that is a huge problem in Florida. That creates problems for those escaped or released animals themselves, because they likely are not able to survive well in the wild. But it can also really wreak havoc on the natural ecosystem. It can upset the balance there, which in turn is then going to damage the environment and damage wildlife who do live in those wild environments. So really good updates out of these states. We have more, the list continues. So just moving right along to Missouri. There were several preemption bills that were defeated in Missouri. So again, we're looking at bad bills that we're working to stop. And we see this with preemption. We've seen it in several states. These bills would have threatened local ordinances that protect animals, such things like retail pet sales bans and declaw. So we were really excited to see that those preemption bills did not end up passing in Missouri. And then in New Jersey, we saw some really exciting success with a bill that prohibits raising pigs in extreme confinement. This is something that my colleagues have been working on for years in New Jersey. So it was just absolutely groundbreaking and so exciting to see it finally pass the legislature. We are looking forward to seeing that one get signed into law soon. And then New Jersey also passed a cost of animal care bill. So this one would enable animal care agencies to file for really critical funds to cover the cost of caring for animal victims in cruelty cases. Often animals in cruelty cases are held by animal shelters and agencies essentially while they are being used as evidence. And so they're being held for a really long time, and those costs of care do rack up. So providing for the cost of care is a really exciting thing that's going to help ensure that those animals are well cared for. And then in New Mexico, a wildlife corridors bill passed into law. And so wildlife corridor bills are really essential for wildlife because there are so many things that we have in the environment, such as roads and highways, that break up wildlife habitat and make it harder for them to live in the way that they naturally would. And so wildlife corridors essentially make it easier for wildlife to cross things like highways, and they connect habitats that have previously been broken up by human activity. So that was great to see out of New Mexico. And then finally, we have New York. New York passed a wildlife killing contest bill to prohibit these cruel contests. These are contests where essentially participants compete in several categories to kill the most or the largest or the heaviest animals for cash prizes. And then often after the contest is over, the carcasses are dumped. So you can just see it is a huge waste of animal life. These contests can kill hundreds of animals within a matter of hours. Really cruel to wildlife, but also, in some cases threatening to kind of upset the balance of ecosystems. And so we were glad to see that this passed the legislature in New York. Again, waiting for that bill to be signed and really excited to see that eventually signed into law. So continuing on, we have more victories at the state level. It was a busy spring and a busy early summer in terms of our legislation at the state level. So starting with Texas, really good bills were passed in Texas. One was a bill to strengthen Texas's animal possession ban. So Texas has a possession ban for animal cruelty, but it would work to strengthen it and kind of close a loophole there. So that was exciting. And then another one was passed to close a loophole in the shark fin sales ban in Texas. And then finally, a bill to reform the licensed breeder program in Texas to further prevent irresponsible breeding of dogs. In Oklahoma, we were part of a coalition which successfully opposed bills that would have reduced cockfighting penalties. So again, one that we were opposing there, really, really exciting to see that. And then in Oregon, several victories in Oregon that have passed the legislature, waiting for these to be signed into law. The first is a bill to allocate funding for Oregon Special Prosecutor for animal abuse cases, just to ensure that that position can continue. So the bill that I have up here is the original bill. This did not pass, this stalled out, but actually the language was included in a different bill that ended up passing. So it has the exact same effect. The funding did go through, and that position will continue. And then Oregon also passed a retail pet sales ban and a cosmetic testing ban. So very, very successful bills in Oregon that'll do a lot to help animals. And then finally, at the state level, we have Washington. Washington passed a cost of care bill. So that was exciting. It allows animal shelters to file for cost of care for animal cruelty victims, and then also a bill to reform retail pet sales. So that wraps up the state legislative list. There's a lot going on, as you can see, in several states. We will be back working in many of those states in 2024 sessions, since many of them have concluded already this year. We'll be in other states as well, fighting for animal protection. So please, again, reach out if you didn't see any victories in your states and you're curious what we're up to. I am more than happy to share. So then we have local legislation. We have been working on several issues at the local level and have some really exciting updates to share here. The first is Lexington, Massachusetts. A fur sales ban passed, which again goes back to a lot of the fur farming issues that I was talking about with the Mink Virus Act at the federal level. Prohibiting fur sales is going to decrease the demand for fur farming, which is a very cruel practice for animals. And then North Andover, Massachusetts passed a pet store bylaw into law, prohibiting the sale of dogs, cats, guinea pigs, and rabbits. Washington, D.C. passed an animal care omnibus bill, and it includes several different issue areas. One is a retail sale on several species of animals in pet stores. There was a cat declaw ban. There was a provision in there to consider the best interests of animals in divorce. Really just so many things that are going to help animals in Washington, D.C. So that was incredibly exciting to work on and see pass in Washington, D.C. And then finally, New York City passed a guinea pig retail sales ban into law. So I just wanted to take a second because we're seeing a really encouraging theme with a lot of these pieces of local legislation with the retail pet sales ban. I think that traditionally we have seen these with cats and dogs, and that is absolutely fantastic. The retail pet sales bans do so much for cats and dogs, but I think it's also encouraging to see that some of these are now extending to other species of animals like rabbits, guinea pigs, some of those smaller species of animals that do suffer a lot in the pet store trade and in pet stores themselves. And so encouraging to see these trends. I hope to see that continue in other municipalities and hope to see some more good news on our next legislative update from the local level. So now let's talk a little bit about getting involved. So I just want to make it really clear, you know, we just got through going over all of these incredible wins for animals, but we could not do this without advocates and without what I like to call citizen lobbyists. We need constituents reaching out to their elected officials. It is absolutely essential. Elected officials want to know what's important to the people they represent and to the people in their districts. So we couldn't do this work without you. We really need everyone getting involved, letting their legislators know that animals are important and that they should be part of the conversation. So how do we do this? There are several ways to do this. I would recommend really getting to know your legislators, getting to know them at the local, state, and federal level, and getting to know their staff as well, just starting to develop those relationships. That's incredibly important. And in some cases, you can develop that relationship to the point where they're going to be reaching out to you when an animal issue crosses their desk. And that is, I mean, that's incredible. That's what we want to see. So if you don't know who your legislators are, again, I have the link to find my rep on the aldf.org page. Highly recommend you go check that out. Another way to do this is just to get in the habit of reaching out by email or phone call or requesting meetings, whatever you have time for and whatever you are comfortable with. All of these are effective. I would say meetings are definitely the most effective, and placing phone calls or sending emails, you know, that can just take a few minutes. And if it's something that you kind of get into the practice of doing, it's really easy. You just pick up the phone and let the staff member who answers the phone know that they should support or oppose this particular issue. And that's pretty much it. So that's another really impactful thing that you can do. Social media is a great tool for connecting with your elected officials. Our legislators and their teams do keep an eye on their social media accounts. And so if, for instance, a legislator has introduced an animal protection bill, it's really great to just hop on Twitter, hop on social media, whatever social media medium is your favorite that you use, and just thank them, just tag them and thank them. If there's a bill that's up for a vote, tagging them and asking them to vote for it, that can be really effective. They do keep an eye on their social media. So that's another really easy way to connect with elected officials. And then letters to the editors and op-eds. that can be hugely impactful, especially if you happen to reside in the same city or town as your legislator, because that's another one that they keep an eye on. You know, what's going on in the community? What are constituents concerned about? What are constituents talking about? Writing letters to the editor, that's something where, you know, it's just a quick paragraph about an issue, and that is going to be seen by perhaps by your elected officials and by a lot of folks in your community who might then also decide that they want to get involved. So just increasing awareness there with letters to the editor and op-eds, that's a really great way to do that. Also action alerts. If you're not signed up for Animal Legal Defense Fund action alerts right now, I would recommend doing that, aldf.org/take action. This just makes it really easy to keep track of issues. We will send you an action alert whenever there is a key step in the legislative process that needs addressing. So again, if a bill is scheduled for a vote, we will send an action alert. It really just takes a few clicks just to get an email through to your legislator that this issue is important to you and that you want them to vote for it, vote against it, whatever the action might be. We will provide all of the background information there. And then finally, reaching out to us, reaching out to the legislative affairs manager who covers your state. That is a really great thing to do. We are always happy to help. We are always so excited to work with constituents and supporters and advocates who want to get involved in these issues. So if you're not sure who covers your state, you can always reach out to me or reach out to ALDF, just our general inbox, and we can get you connected because again, we really need everybody jumping in and doing this work, and we just could not do this work without advocates. So those are just some of the ways to get involved. I also really quickly wanted to mention your sphere of influence. This is yet another way to get involved, and this is something that I think all of us can just kind of keep in the back of our minds when we're thinking about these issue areas. So for instance, do you have any connections to legislators? Do you have any connections to the governor's office in your state? Do you have celebrity connections where a celebrity might want to get involved with an animal issue area? Influential community members who really might have a strong voice with certain legislators, or any other grassroots organizations in your state that might support the issue. There are so many ways to use your sphere of influence, and we all have one. We all have connections who might be particularly impactful with one legislator or another. So I really encourage you to kind of think through that today. And if you have any ideas from thinking through your connections and your network on folks who might be impactful for any of the pieces of legislation that I have mentioned today, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Our team would love to hear from you on how to utilize your sphere of influence. So that is all I have today. I really just want to say again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for attending and listening. I hope that this has been useful. I am really looking forward to sharing even more legislative wins with you. Our team is going to be on the ground working for animals. And thank you for being on the ground advocating for animals every single day. So there is my contact info. There are some ways to follow the work of Animal Legal Defense Fund. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Alicia, for that great information. That was really incredible.